Welcome back, everybody. Last week, one of the biggest stories in the market was the long-awaited approval of multiple Bitcoin ETFs. And now I know that Bitcoin tends to be a very polarizing topic, and some of you don't want to hear about it at all. But there are three reasons why I thought it was important to talk about today. And the first one is, with the price going up, more people than ever are going to start asking about it again, especially since the ETFs are going to represent an easier to understand way to get exposure to Bitcoin. And second, I have a pretty unique history with it in that I bought my first Bitcoin way back in 2014. Plus, I've worked in payments technology for my corporate career, and I've been pretty deep into it in terms of self-custody and understanding the overall tech. So I have a pretty unique background in it compared to most people. And lastly, hopefully, as you already know, on this channel, I try to present information in a way that's transparent and balanced so that we can all kind of learn without all the hype and noise. And if there was ever an asset that needed information presented in a transparent and balanced way, it's Bitcoin. So what we're going to talk about today is the Bitcoin ETFs that were approved and what people are saying about them, why anyone would actually want to invest in Bitcoin to begin with, how similar buying a Bitcoin ETF is to buying actual Bitcoin, how high could Bitcoin actually go, and of course, should you be investing in it? So let's go ahead and dive into these ETFs and see if it's something that you should be caring about or not.
Bitcoin ETFs are now trading. You can see several of them are in the red.
11 Bitcoin ETFs were approved last week with fees ranging from 0.20% all the way up to about 1.5%. Now, about half of them were at 0.30% or below, though. The ETFs come from a range of different providers, including Fidelity, Grayscale, Invesco, iShares, which is BlackRock, Cathie Wood's ARK, as well as many more. Now, according to reports, they had over $4.6 billion in volume on the first day.
Now, a lot of people are asking me, okay, wait a minute, don't these track Bitcoin? We're up 1.7, here's Grayscale down 0.6. Explain why this is not a good day to say it should track it, but this is not the right day.
These will track Bitcoin very well over the long term. They're buying and holding Bitcoin in a custodian. That's all they're doing. You're seeing some variance in demand. Grayscale, an existing product, so maybe more people moving into lower fee products. Bitwise, a new product, more demand on the buy side. But these are both great products. There are a lot of great products out there. Again, this will normalize over time. But these are probably the easiest way for people to get peace of mind when they're buying Bitcoin that have ever existed. It's day one. There's going to be 1,000 days of it. It's a very exciting moment.
Now, a lot of the conversation is about investors who are interested in Bitcoin and want exposure to it, but don't want to deal with actually buying and storing the asset directly. And in that way, the ETF provides an option to get exposure to Bitcoin directly through your brokerage. And some people are also looking at it as a step towards legitimacy and regulatory clarity. This is actually something that Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, talked about as well.
This is a monumental step for the crypto industry and for Coinbase too. And the reason is that, look, there's 52 million Americans who have been using crypto over the past decade. And I think they've been hungry for some kind of acknowledgement from the government and the SEC in particular that this asset class is here to stay. And they finally got that. It took a long time. I want to give a big shout out to Grayscale, which is one of the firms that pursued this in the court to finally get it to fruition. But it finally happened. We had a number of ETFs approved today. And of course, it was a big day for Coinbase too, because we were named as the custodian in 10 out of 13 of these applications. So I think this means that over time, we'll see new pools of capital come into Bitcoin. But more importantly, we had a huge regulatory milestone that showed the legitimizing power of this industry.
Now, obviously, the fact that the ETFs were approved means that there's some additional regulatory clarity. But if we listen to SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, he's still preaching caution and not wanting to endorse Bitcoin.
What is your message to investors about Bitcoin now? Because we're going to have all sorts of public investors now potentially have access to Bitcoin in a way that they didn't before. We were just talking to Larry Fink. He said that he got a huge wave of new investors getting into Bitcoin through this ETF. You have still suggested to be cautious about it. And I'm trying to understand how you think about those cross currents in terms of the message you're telling investors.
Well, look, Bitcoin itself, we did not approve, we do not endorse. This is a product called an exchange-traded product, a way that investors can invest in that underlying non-security commodity called Bitcoin. But yes, investors, I think, should be aware that the underlying asset is a highly speculative, volatile asset, and amongst its use cases is really for illicit activity, money laundering and sanctions and ransomware and the like. And I know that you've asked other people over the last few days, is it being used as a store of value? It's a speculative, volatile store of value. Is it being used as a payment anywhere? Are we buying cups of coffee with it? Not really. The only payment mechanism it's being used for in a primary sense is illicit activity.
Now, obviously, with any investment, we should be cautious, but especially with something like Bitcoin when we know it's going to have a lot of volatility and pretty wide price swings. Which again, volatility in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, as long as it fits your investment strategy. Because otherwise, it can cause us to do weird things like FOMO in at the top or panic sell at the bottom. But Bitcoin has also been called things like rat poison by Charlie Munger. Plus, you have people like Jamie Dimon saying that it has no value and it's only used for bad things. And the list goes on and on. So if that's the case, why do people want to invest in Bitcoin at all? Well, in terms of performance, it's returned over 4,000% over the last 10 years, which will obviously make people notice. But even in 2023, it handily outpaced the S&P 500 by returning 165% for the year. Now, to be totally fair, that's after it posted a staggering 64% loss in 2022. So again, like we talked about, wide price swings. But in addition to just investment returns, Bitcoin's primary purpose is to be global money that is outside of the financial system. This is actually why Bitcoin was created. It was supposed to be a digital cash that provided freedom from control and debasement. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole history of Bitcoin here, but the original intent was that our financial system requires a lot of trust. Trust in the government, trust in banks, and when that trust is compromised, it hurts people in the form of inflation or restricted access to their money. And Bitcoin was an attempt to give the power back to the people in terms of their money in exchange for some additional responsibilities of having to manage it for yourself. And again, I'm not going to go through all the details and the different opinions and sides of it, but that is the original intent of what it was created for. And then the last reason, which is kind of related to price, but people think the combination of Bitcoin's digital scarcity and the introduction of the ETFs will push the price up exponentially going forward. The basic premise here is that Bitcoin has a few things going on that are all kind of working together. One, a static supply of 21 million Bitcoin with a release schedule that decelerates about every 4 years. And then two, a very passionate group of believers that are more likely to hold than sell. And so what people anticipate is that since these new ETF products are spot ETFs, which means that they actually have to hold a representative amount of Bitcoin for the shares that they sell. So as more people buy the ETFs, they have to buy up the Bitcoin, and if the supply is low, then by the rules of supply and demand, the price should go up, and maybe by a lot. At the end of the day, why people want to invest in Bitcoin, obviously for a lot of people, maybe most, is that it's a speculative asset that has performed amazingly well, and they want exposure to some of those gains. But for others, it's more of an economic and cultural movement as much as an investment philosophy. Is buying a Bitcoin ETF just like buying actual Bitcoin? So the quick answer to that is no, it's not the same. What the ETF provides is exposure to Bitcoin's price movement, and also it makes it available to institutional investors, pension funds, and just a wider group of potential investors that either wouldn't be interested or even allowed to directly invest in Bitcoin itself. But ultimately, buying the ETF is only about speculation on Bitcoin's price, and if you think that it'll help your overall portfolio returns. But for the other use case of wanting to be global money outside of the financial system, you would actually have to buy Bitcoin for that and take self-custody and all those things. Because just by definition, if you're buying an ETF that's through your broker, then you are within the existing financial system. And obviously, being able to buy Bitcoin and hold it yourself is not going to be for everyone, at least for now. But that's why most believe that the ETF approvals are opening up the asset to new investors more than just moving any old ones over to a new product. And that's part of why people are excited about it, because again, the more money that comes in, the higher the demand goes with a static or shrinking supply, and in theory, the price will go up. So I know when people hear this, the first thing they wonder is, well then, how high could this actually go? And I just want to qualify this with saying that nobody actually knows. Like there's no way to predict exactly how markets are going to react, regardless of what people are telling you online. So don't fall into that trap. And that's part of the challenge with trying to value Bitcoin, because it doesn't have things like cash flows or earnings or anything else that we can use to try to model the future value off of. And this has historically been one of the main criticisms. When people say it's only a speculative asset based on what someone else is willing to pay. Now, to be fair, all financial assets are based on what someone else is willing to pay, but the difference is that stocks or real estate or private businesses can distribute cash flows that makes it to investors. And then companies have earnings or things you can analyze to try to come up with a reasonable valuation of what they're worth. And with Bitcoin, that doesn't really exist. But what I would argue is that it's similar to other commodities like gold, oil, or whatever, where the price is solely based on supply and demand. Now, we can dispute whether or not that's good or simply speculative or whatever, but it's not totally a foreign concept. But let's listen to Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, whose company just released and got an ETF approved, what he thinks about the future of the asset.
But I'm a believer in it because I do believe it is an alternative source for wealth holding. I don't believe it's ever going to be a currency. I believe it's an asset class.
You don't believe it ever becomes a currency?
No, I think we're going to create digital currencies. We're going to use the technology for it. We're going to use the blockchain.
How important is that, though, to then the long-term value proposition
of Bitcoin?
Of Bitcoin. If it's not something that ultimately becomes a currency, if it's simply, we'll call it digital gold, it's an asset of some sort, what does that mean?
It means,
in terms of price,
I believe it goes up if the world is more frightened, if people have fearful of geopolitical risk, they're fearful of their own risk. It's no different than what gold represented over thousands of years. It is a asset class that protects you.
Right.
And unlike gold, where we manufacture new gold, we're almost at the ceiling of the amount of Bitcoin that we created.
Believe it or not, I actually tend to think that Larry's view is one of the more realistic possibilities for Bitcoin, in that it may never become a de facto currency, but it's a digital asset that mimics at worst a digital gold. And if you just take the high-level math on that, gold's market cap is about $13.7 trillion, and Bitcoin's market cap is about $835 billion. So that's about a 16x difference. Now, again, this is just speculation for fun about what the asset class could be, because it's possible that it never actually reaches gold's market cap, or that maybe it goes well beyond that. We don't really know. But this is where it comes back to there's no right or wrong investment. It's all dependent on what we think is going to happen in the future and if it fits our investment strategy or not. And with that said, let's get to the real question. Should you be investing in it? Now, the first thing anyone should consider when thinking about investing in Bitcoin or Bitcoin ETFs is this. Do you actually want to take the risk? It's a highly speculative asset that, yes, it has had amazing returns in its lifetime, and yes, it's an innovative solution to an age-old problem, and yes, it has a huge cult following that you can look at as either a positive or a negative depending on where you sit. But as an investment, the bottom line is it's for people willing to take on a higher amount of risk for a potential of a higher reward. And you have to just understand that going into it. But assuming that you've already asked yourself those questions and you are still interested, then here's how I would break it down. In terms of if you should invest in the ETF or in Bitcoin itself, if you're just looking to get exposure to Bitcoin's price and overall returns, then invest in the ETF. It's easy. You can do it through your existing brokerage. You can get in and out of it just like a stock, and that's probably what you're looking for. But if you're interested in the original premise of Bitcoin being global money outside of the financial system, then I would say the only real way to get that is to hold actual Bitcoin, which means you have to go through the process of understanding, okay, how do I buy it? How do I use it? And more importantly, how do I store it securely? And that's just not going to be for everybody. And the only caveat to these, I would say, is if you're interested in the original premise of Bitcoin, but you're just not ready for the responsibility of holding it yourself, but you still want to be invested in it, then the ETF can be a decent on-ramp for you to get invested into it while you're still learning. But lastly, let's listen to Josh Brown about how his firm is approaching investing in Bitcoin for their clients.
I think it'll be really fun to watch, because a month from now, we'll probably stop talking about some of these, and it'll be pretty clear. Some of these will capture the attention of investment advisors like myself. Right. The RIA channel, eventually maybe the wirehouse brokerage channel. That'll be one horse race. Liquidity is really important to hedge funds who need to get in and out. That'll be a different horse race, and maybe that's the one Sun and Shine wins. But there will be a different version for different users, and we see examples of that in a lot of different asset classes. I just don't think there are going to be 10 of them.
Agree.
So
I think a lot of people don't think that. Just in general, what percent of a portfolio do you think an RIA is going to make something like this?
I mean, we were like a little bit too ahead of our time. We launched an index product with Wisdom Tree a couple of years ago, right before Sam Bankman-Fried, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like a bad example. We have clients that are interested. Those are the clients who we allocate to the index product. So last year was a good year. The year before was terrible. But we don't like go out and say, you should do this.
Right.
We have a solution if people want to do it. And our solution, of course, is passive. It's an index. Okay. It's tax efficient, but like we're not running around screaming.
There's no one size fits all. Gotcha.
No, some clients shouldn't, and some clients should.
And this really gets to the point. Ultimately, you don't have to invest in Bitcoin or a Bitcoin ETF. And you don't have to even have an opinion on it or be knowledgeable in it. There are plenty of things to invest in where you can make really great returns and become financially independent. The issue is that we see it in the news because the price swings are so dramatic. And then you have one person who says it's the future and another person who says it's rat poison and it's going to zero. But the reality is you don't have to agree with either one of them. Or more importantly, you don't need to care about it at all. If it's something that you're interested in because you think it might add something to your portfolio, then consider trying a small allocation to it based on your risk tolerance. But if it's something that you would never want to be involved in because that's what you believe, then that's totally fine too. Just ignore it and move on. And that's part of what I love about investing. It's personalized for all of us, and we get to decide what our strategy is and how we're going to approach it. So as long as we're not making rash, uninformed decisions based on someone else's perspective, I think we'll be just fine. Now, if you guys enjoyed me covering this topic, definitely let me know in the comments because I'm not sure if you're like, wow, just stick to stocks and stock-related ETFs, or if you actually think it's valuable to hear about some of these other things in a more balanced way. Now, if you guys are actually interested in hearing more about Bitcoin, I made a bunch of old videos about it where I explained in more detail how it works and what it's about. And if you want to see those, click on this playlist right here. Hope you guys have a great day out there. Financial independence is true freedom, so keep building and stacking wins. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.